I almost didn't go. That's the thing nobody tells you about moments that stay with you forever. They usually start with almost didn't. Almost stayed home. Almost picked a different seat. Almost left at intermission because the woman 2 rows ahead of me had a perfume situation that was genuinely criminal. But I stayed. And, because I stayed, I saw it. Westminster Abbey in December does something to a person. I don't mean that in the tourist brochure way, the oh how majestic way. I mean it physically. The cold hits you before you're even inside, this particular English cold that feels older than the building, older than the stone, like it's been waiting around since the Plantagenets and it has opinions about you. You walk through those doors and the warmth swallows you, and then the candles hit your eyes, and for a moment your brain simply cannot process that this is a real place where real things happen. It was the 3rd of December. A Tuesday. The annual Christmas Carol concert, the kind of event that gets announced quietly, fills up through channels most of us aren't on, and then appears on the news 3 days later looking like something from a dream. The pews were packed. Not chaotically, not the way a festival is packed, properly, carefully, the way people sit when they're aware they're inside something significant. I was there as a guest of a colleague who'd received 2 tickets through her firm. She'd texted me at 11 that morning, free tonight? Royal Carol concert. Smart dress. You have 4 hours. I wore the only smart thing I owned that wasn't a funeral outfit. Dark green. A little too cold for the weather, but I wasn't about to ruin the story I was already composing in my head. The program said the royal family would be attending. That sentence, in that context, in that building, does something funny to a room. People who'd been chatting freely suddenly straightened. Someone near me refolded their program. A man 3 seats down abroad, in a suit that had seen better decades, quietly took off his glasses and cleaned them for no apparent reason. We were all performing composure we didn't quite feel. I'd seen members of the royal family before, technically. On screens. On the front of magazines at the petrol station. Once, years ago, I was on the mall when a motorcade went past and I saw the back of someone's head through tinted glass and told everyone about it for 6 months. This was different. This was the same room. The same air. The choir took their places, first rows of children in white and red, faces pink from the cold they'd just come in from, some of them still blinking the outdoor dark out of their eyes. They stood with the particular stillness of children who have been told many times what is expected of them tonight, which made them simultaneously more composed and more visibly terrified than any adult in the room. One small boy in the 3rd row kept looking at his shoes. I liked him immediately. Then, the family arrived. Not with fanfare, that's always the thing that surprises people who've never been near it. There's no trumpet. No announcement that splits the air. There's a kind of shift in the room's attention, like a tide changing direction, and you feel it before you understand it, and then you turn your head and they're simply there. The Princess of Wales came in first, in a way that managed to seem both intentional and completely natural. Behind her, the children. Princess Charlotte. 9 years old, nearly 10 at that point, I think, though I'm not going to pretend I had her Wikipedia page memorized. Small, in a dark coat with a velvet collar that looked like it had been chosen by someone who understood that a child should still look like a child even at an event like this. Her hair was pulled back but, not severely, the kind of arrangement that suggests effort without announcing it. She walked the way children walk when they're concentrating on walking correctly. You could see it. That small extra precision in each step, the chin lifted the way someone had probably told her to lift it, the awareness of space around her that children don't naturally have, they acquire it, and the acquiring shows. But there was something else. Something I couldn't name yet. The concert began. I will not pretend I remember every carol in sequence. I remember O Come All Ye Faithful because the bass section of the choir was extraordinary, the kind of sound that doesn't come out of human lungs, you think, it comes out of the building, out of the stone itself. I remember a reading from Isaiah that made the man with the glasses press his lips together and look at the ceiling. I remember watching Charlotte. Not in a strange way. In the way you watch someone who was doing something genuinely interesting with their face. She was present properly, fully present in the way that children rarely are at formal events, in the way that most adults aren't either. She wasn't performing interest. She wasn't the glazed endurance you sometimes see on young royal faces at long public engagements. She was in it. When the choir hit a particular note, a high, clean sustained note in once in Royal David City that seemed to make the candle flames lean slightly toward it, I saw Charlotte close her eyes. Just for a second. Like she was keeping it. That's when I thought, something is going to happen tonight. Not something dramatic. Not something newsworthy in the traditional sense. Something small and true. The kind of moment that only registers if you're looking at the right thing at the right time, and most people won't be, because most people will be looking at what they're supposed to look at. I kept watching. The program had a section midway through where the children were to cross the stage, a small processional, several of them presenting flowers and participating in a brief ceremonial portion of the evening near the altar. Standard. Planned. The kind of thing that's been rehearsed until it's smooth. Charlotte was in this part. She knew it. You could tell she knew it. There was a slight repositioning, a quiet intake of breath, the way her hands moved from her lap to her sides and, then, back again. The moment was coming. And, none of us, not me, not the man with the glasses, not the small boy who was still thinking about his shoes, had any idea what it would actually look like when it arrived. There's a specific kind of silence in a room full of people who are all trying to be quiet. It's not peaceful. It has texture. You can feel everyone else's held breath. You can feel the effort of several hundred people not coughing, not shifting, not letting their program crinkle at the wrong moment. It's the silence of collective performance, everyone performing their own stillness for everyone else, and it sits in a room like a held chord. Westminster Abbey in that moment was full of it. The processional section was beginning. I should tell you about the stage layout, because it matters for what comes next. The area near the altar where this portion of the program was taking place was elevated. A few steps up from the main floor. Carpeted in deep red, the kind of red that absorbs light rather than reflecting it, so the whole space looked like something painted rather than something built. On either side of the steps, candelabras. Tall ones, cathedral tall, with actual flames that moved when anyone walked past them. The children came from the left side of the congregation, in a small organized line. They'd clearly rehearsed this, the spacing was neat, the pace was measured. An adult coordinator of some kind was stationed just off to the side, visible but trying not to be, the way people look when they've spent 3 weeks preparing something and are now watching it happen in real time while internally calculating everything that could still go wrong. Charlotte was third in the line. The first child crossed without incident. Poised, careful, did everything correctly. Received a small moment of acknowledgement and stepped to the designated position. The second child, a boy, slightly taller, with the look of someone who had been told he was representing something important and had taken this very seriously, also crossed without incident. Perhaps with slightly more solemnity than was strictly necessary for a 9-year-old, but no one was complaining. Then, Charlotte. She stepped forward and I noticed immediately that she was moving differently from the others. Not incorrectly. Not nervously. Just differently. There was a lightness in it. A lift in the step that the rehearsed version probably didn't have. Like someone who has practiced the map so many times they've stopped looking at it and started looking at the landscape. She was halfway across the stage when it happened. The elderly woman was seated at the end of the front row nearest the stage. I hadn't particularly noticed her before. She was one of those presences that registers as background, which is to say she was small and still and dressed in dark colors and the room had provided her no reason to demand attention. White hair. A program resting on her lap that she hadn't opened. Hands folded. She was looking at the choir. Or she had been. When Charlotte came into her eye line, when the small girl in the dark coat with the velvet collar stepped into that particular patch of candlelight, the old woman's face changed. I saw it from where I was sitting. Not dramatically. No gasp, no gesture. Just a change in the quality of her attention, a warmth that moved through her expression like the warmth through those abbey doors. You felt it before you understood it. She smiled. The quiet kind. The kind that belongs to a person alone, not performed for anyone, not directed anywhere in particular. The kind of smile that means this is a beautiful thing and I am grateful to be here to see it. Charlotte saw her. I'm certain of this because I watched it happen. The girl's eyes found the woman's face, the way eyes do when they catch an expression pointed at them, a kind of peripheral radar that even children have, and, for a half second she might have continued past. She didn't. She paused. On a stage. Mid-processional. At a Royal Carol concert with several hundred people watching and cameras and the full weight of occasion pressing down on the moment. She paused. And she dipped her head. That's the gesture I am trying to describe to you, and I am aware that in the describing I may flatten it, because it was not a large thing. It was not theatrical. If you had looked away at the wrong second, you would have missed it entirely and spent the rest of your life not knowing there was anything to miss. It was a small, deliberate, unhurried inclination of her head, the kind that says I see you without saying anything. Not the performative half-bow of public ceremony. Not the automated nod of someone moving through their obligations. A real one. The kind of gesture that comes from being taught well and also from being, underneath the teaching, a person who means it. She held it for a breath. The old woman's smile changed, deepened, or sharpened, or became something more than just pleasure. It became recognition. The recognition of being seen by someone who had every reason not to look. Then, Charlotte straightened, turned forward, and continued across the stage. For seconds, maybe 5. The whole thing. The man with the glasses hadn't noticed. My colleague hadn't noticed. Most of the room hadn't noticed, because most of the room was watching the main processional, the altar, the choir, the official sightlines of the event. But I had noticed. And, when I looked around in the immediate aftermath, that involuntary scan you do after witnessing something, looking for confirmation in other faces, I found one other person who had. A woman about 4 rows behind the elderly woman. 60s, maybe. Gray coat. She was looking at the space Charlotte had just passed through with the expression of someone who has just been reminded of something they had begun to forget. She didn't say anything. She just pressed her lips together and looked back at the program in her hands. I've thought about that gesture a lot since then. About what it requires. Not technically it is nothing, a tilt of a head, biomechanically insignificant. But, situationally. In that room, under that weight, at that age, with everything that comes attached to being who she is and having every eye in the building nominally on you, to stop. To choose to stop, not because the choreography required it but because a person was there and the moment required it, that's not a small thing. That's actually quite a large thing wearing a small thing's clothes. The processional completed. The children took their positions. The next carol began. I looked at the elderly woman again. She had reopened her program. She was reading it or appearing to read it with the careful attention of someone managing an overflow of feeling by focusing on small print. Her hands, I noticed, were not quite steady. Here is what I kept thinking about during the second half of the concert. I kept thinking about rehearsal. About how much of a royal child's life is rehearsal. The walkthrough. The briefing. This is where you stand, this is when you move, this is the correct way to hold your hands, this is the correct speed for the step. I thought about how many of these events Charlotte has already attended in her short life, the ones we've seen photographed, the ones we haven't, the ones that were just the family doing the thing the family does and a whole logistics operation around them making sure it happens correctly. I thought about the weight of that. Not in a pitying way. I don't think it's a tragedy to be her. But I was sitting in that building thinking about what it does to a child to be watched, truly watched, formally watched, publicly watched, from before she could understand what watching meant. To grow up in a world where your posture is news. Where the angle of your chin is analyzed. Where a frown at the wrong moment gets a headline and a smile at the right moment gets a different headline. The question I kept landing on was this: when someone grows up in that kind of scrutiny, what happens to their instincts? Does the watching erode them? Turn every gesture into performance, every kindness into optics? Or does it do something else? The concert continued. There was a reading, one of the children did it, a girl maybe 11 or 12, with the focused calm of someone who had faced things scarier than a microphone. She read from Luke. And, suddenly, there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host. Suddenly. Right there in the oldest text in the room. The word landed differently after what I'd seen. I want to be careful here about what I'm claiming. I am not claiming Charlotte is exceptional in some sweeping, mythologized sense. I am not doing the thing where a single observed moment becomes a referendum on a person's entire character, their upbringing, their family, their future. That kind of storytelling is cheap and I don't trust it. What I am saying is narrower and, I think, more true. I am saying that in a specific moment, under specific conditions, a 9-year-old girl made a specific choice. And, the choice was to acknowledge a stranger. Not because anyone told her to. Not because the program included it. Not because a camera was pointed at her face at that exact second. I checked later, and that appears to have been one of the brief gaps in coverage. It was not for documentation. It was just because the old woman was there, and smiling, and the moment seemed to ask for something, and Charlotte answered it. After the processional, she returned to her seat. I could see her profile from where I was sitting, the edge of her jaw, the back of her collar, the small movements of a child settling back into the formality of the event. She picked up her program. She looked at it. She set it down again. Beside her, her younger brother George was sitting with the particular stillness of a boy who has been sitting still for a long time and is becoming philosophical about it. Charlotte leaned slightly toward him, so slightly I almost didn't register it, and said something. He didn't respond visibly. Kept his eyes forward. The picture of composure. A beat later, the corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. She'd made him smile. Without anyone seeing it happen, without it being for anyone, in the middle of a formal event in a cathedral with hundreds of people and the full machinery of royal occasion around them, she'd leaned over and said whatever small private thing she'd said, and made her brother smile. I thought about their mother. The Princess of Wales, who has spoken publicly about wanting her children to have, what was the word she used? Empathy. The real kind. The inconvenient kind. The kind that makes you stop mid-processional because someone's face is asking for a moment of your attention and you decide the moment is worth more than the schedule. I looked over at her. She was listening to the choir with that quality of attention I'd noticed before, full, present, real. Not the performed interest of public appearances but the actual thing. The same quality I'd seen in Charlotte's face earlier. It occurred to me that this is probably what it looks like when something is genuinely taught. Not the gesture itself. You can't teach a specific gesture. But the orientation underneath the gesture. The sense that other people are real. The sense that noticing them is not a distraction from your purpose but might, in fact, be the purpose. That, I thought, you can teach. And it looks like that. The concert moved through its second half with the particular beauty of things that have been done well for a long time. Carols I'd known since childhood arrived with that strange doubling, the memory version and the present version playing simultaneously, the 7-year-old who sang them in school and the adult who'd turned out complicated and slightly overdressed in a cathedral on a Tuesday. In the bleak midwinter. The choir took it slowly. The way it should be taken. Each note given its full weight before the next one was allowed. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what can I give him? Give my heart. I'm not particularly religious. I'm aware that's an odd thing to insert into a story about a carol concert. But I don't think you have to be religious to feel what that lyric does to a person in a room full of candles and cold stone and the particular December ache of not knowing what year will do to you next. I looked at Charlotte. She was looking at the choir. Eyes open this time. Not closed, not keeping anything. Just watching. The way you watch when you trust that what you're seeing won't need to be stored because something in you already knows it. The concert ended the way good things end. Not abruptly, there was no hard stop, no lights up, no sudden dissolution of the atmosphere that had been building for the past 2 hours. It wound down the way a long tide goes out, gradually, with the warmth still there even as the sound faded, people becoming slightly more themselves again as the formal weight of the occasion began to lift. People stood. The shuffling and the murmuring returned, and the Abbey filled with the sound of several hundred people remembering they had coats and programs and phones they'd been politely ignoring and lives waiting outside those doors in the December cold. I didn't move immediately. I'm not sure I could have. I found the old woman with my eyes. She was being helped into her coat by a younger woman, granddaughter, maybe, or a carer, someone whose relationship to her communicated I do this routinely and with care. The old woman was talking, her head turned slightly, gesturing at something in the direction of the choir's now vacated section. She looked fine. She looked better than fine, actually. She looked like someone who had arrived carrying something and was leaving with it slightly lighter. I thought about going over. Saying, "What? I saw. Did you know? Do you understand what just happened to you on that stage?" I didn't go. It wasn't mine to go. Whatever had passed between her and Charlotte in those 4 or 5 seconds was complete. It didn't need my annotation. My colleague found me by the arm. "Ready? It's freezing and I cannot feel my feet." 1 second. "You've been 1 second for 3 minutes. That was probably true. I took a last look at the space near the altar, the red carpet, the extinguishing candles now being tended to by someone with a long brass tool, the last members of the choir filing out with the specific loosening of people who've been formally composed for several hours and are now allowed to be human again. Charlotte and her family had already gone. There'd been no announcement, no ceremonial departure, the same quiet arrival in reverse. They were simply not there anymore. The room was becoming an ordinary room again. Still Westminster Abbey, still extraordinary by most measures, but returning to itself after the particular electricity of the evening. I put on my coat. Outside, the cold was immediate and real. Parliament Square was strewn with lights that swayed in a wind that had picked up since we'd gone in. A group of tourists were taking photographs of the Abbey's facade, tilting their phones up at the illuminated stone. A bus went past on the embankment, ordinary and orange, carrying people who had no idea what had just happened inside that building. Most people walking past had no idea. That felt right, somehow. My colleague was talking about dinner, somewhere warm, somewhere with wine, the usual negotiation, and I was nodding and following and making the right noises, but part of me was still in that room. Still watching the small figure in the dark coat with the velvet collar cross a red carpeted stage in candlelight. Still watching her stop. She didn't have to stop. That kept returning to me. All the reasons not to stop. The choreography of the evening. The eyes on her. The cameras. The expectation. The years of training that tell you the most important thing at an official event is to complete the official event correctly. All of that pulling one direction. And she stopped anyway. Because a person was there. I've tried to explain this to a few people since and I always land on the same problem. It sounds minor in the telling. A head dip. A pause. 5 seconds. So what, people say? She was just being polite. And, I think, yes. And, also no. And, also, what do you think polite is, at its root, when it's the real thing and not the performance of the thing? Polite, at its root, is a decision to treat another person as present and worth acknowledging. Polite, at its root, is the choice to be in the room you're actually in rather than the room in your head or the room of your responsibilities. Most adults can't do it consistently. We're all partially somewhere else, running our internal calculations, managing our task lists of the day. The being fully present thing, the actually seeing the person in front of you thing, it's harder than it sounds. She was 9 years old. She did it in 4 seconds, in public, under the weight of everything that comes with being who she is. I went back to the Abbey about 3 weeks later. Not for an event. Just went. Solo, on a gray Sunday morning when I needed to be somewhere that had seen more centuries than I could calculate. I sat in one of the pews near the back for about 20 minutes and did not think about anything in particular, which is a form of thinking I'm still learning. The morning light came through the windows in long slanted lines. A small tour group moved through at the far end, a man in a yellow vest speaking quietly, his words carrying in fragments, dating back to rebuilt under the coronation of. I looked at the steps near the altar. The red carpet. The space where the candelabras had stood. I thought about the old woman's hands, not quite steady. I thought about the boy looking at his shoes who had made me like him immediately. I thought about Charlotte, eyes closed for 1 second in the middle of once in Royal David City, keeping something. There's a kind of goodness that announces itself. It wears the right clothes and says the right things and makes sure the cameras catch it at the right angle. It has a press team. It schedules itself in advance and it knows how to be witnessed. And then, there's the other kind. The kind that happens in the gaps of the schedule. In the 4 seconds between your position and theirs. In the small tilt of a head towards someone who wasn't expecting to be seen. That kind doesn't need witnesses to be real. It was real whether I saw it or not. I just happened to be looking.